Mr. President, members of the body, as citizen legislators, we all bring different skills and different insights to our service here. And probably one of the greatest skills that I can provide with my regular job is the ability to look at science and data and apply that as we make policy decisions. And there is no other issue in Virginia that requires the cross-section of those two efforts more than making sure we have in-person school for our kids. So I'm going to run through a few things quickly first because we've heard about these and we've talked about them a lot. What are the consequences for not having in-person school? We have increased depression and anxiety in the cross-section of all of our kids, more suicidal ideation and suicides, abuse, neglect that has gone undetected by the first responders that serve in the schools. We have safety issues, food insecurity, broadband and IT inadequacy. We have incredible strain on families across the state. We know that the school divisions have reduced instructional time compared to being in school 5 days a week, and they've reduced curriculum. So if we look at the science, as we've discussed in all of those, and the astounding cost our children are paying innocently, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the science that maybe would defend why schools shouldn't be opened. And I'll actually start by sincerely telling you there isn't any. We're going to hear on some other articles today, but most recently, the Journal of American Medicine, the AMA Journal, January 26, published an article, and it said that case-controlled studies of children 0 to 18 in schools in Mississippi found that exposures came from social gatherings outside the school but not in the school. The same thing was found in North Carolina, and there was little or no transmission. In fact, in Wisconsin, they found that the incidence of COVID-19 was profoundly lower than in schools and than in the community. The European Center for Disease Prevention and Control reported in December 2020 that investigations concluded that these data, together with the observations that rates of infection among teachers and non-teachers were the same, indicated that schools were not associated with accelerating community transmission. Further, they go on to say that the preponderance of available evidence from the fall school semester, so all the schools that have been open this fall, from the fall school semester, has been reassuring insofar as the type of rapid spread that was frequently seen in other congregate settings, like congregate living facilities or high-density work sites, has not been seen in education. Obviously, they recommended mitigation policies and procedures be in place, as all the schools that have open have been doing. So then we go back to the American Academy of Pediatrics, more science, more evidence, subject matter experts unequivocally in this arena. Last updated on January 5th, 2021, and their conclusion was that keeping the above principles in mind, where they gave guidelines of how to open schools safely, which are very easily accessible to all schools and have been implemented across the Commonwealth as well as across the world. Keeping those principles in mind, the AAP strongly advocates that all policy considerations for school COVID-19 plans should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. Mr. President, as we look at this evidence, if we choose to respect science, we need to do something. We're caught in a stalemate. The governor said close schools. No further guidance has been given. The school divisions are struggling with a way to move forward without guidance. We should be innovating We should be showing ingenuity. I don't know if any of you have talked to your universities or your colleges and you found out what they have done, those that brought kids back. If you look at the interventions and the innovations that they have created to make it safe and, again, without outbreaks, you would be so proud. Necessity is the mother of invention, and it's time for us to provide the necessity. All the tools are there. As a physician, my preeminent charge is to do no harm. Mr. President, members of this body, you are harming Virginia's children without opening schools. We must open schools. I hope that you'll support this bill and listen to the science. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I want to let you know that Saturday morning I had my town hall back home in Fairfax City, and Dr. Bobby Avula was our guest speaker. He is the COVID mitigation coordinator for the state. He's a graduate of Thomas Jefferson High School and a native of Fairfax County, and he was fabulous. I felt with his speaking that his leadership is going to save lives, and I felt like we have the best and the brightest now committed to this struggle. His statement could not have been more unequivocal on opening schools. He said, quote, "Schools are an incredibly safe place to be vis-a-vis other places such as staying at home unattended." He also said that opening schools and vaccination should not be linked because that would unnecessarily delay opening schools, which needs to happen now for the safety of children. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I do not have the medical degree or the pedigree of some of my colleagues, but I do have some life experiences, and I want to paraphrase what my amazing colleague from Senator of Hampton said yesterday about sometimes you got to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And I want to talk a little bit about fatherhood. You know, when I was 43 years old, my wife and I had our fourth child. And I knew just from the beginning, just a gorgeous little baby girl. She was a little bit different than her older siblings who were going on to be preteens and teenagers. And when she was 3 years old, we got a diagnosis that said she was different. And she was going to have a different trajectory in her life. Not better or worse, just different. And we were so fortunate. We lived in Fairfax City, and Fairfax County Public Schools was available to us, and we could get her enrolled in a program. And the people that taught her to learn, to speak, to read and write, to just interact for the first time, Sharon and I, we can never thank those professionals enough. Their experience literally changed her life, and by doing so, changed our lives. And when she was 5, we enrolled her in the ordinary public school. Now, she was in a special ed program, but we decided we wanted her to be in a public school just like her siblings had been. And I remember walking her down to the bus stop that day, and she had a little backpack with Finding Nemo on the back. And she climbed on that bus, and her mom and I were looking on as she looked out the window and waved goodbye to us, smiling. And I had to turn around because I didn't want my wife to see the tears in my eyes. But I knew that for the first time, she was going to be around people to be friends. She was going to be able to have a group of friends. And that's because she was attending a school with other kids, ordinary kids. And for the last 4 years, she's been in school, mostly special ed, and there's been ups and downs, but she's had the ability to go to school every day to have a circle of friends that would otherwise be impossible. Now, when we found out in March that the schools had been closed down, I just assumed there'd be some accommodation made for kids, and there are millions, hundreds of thousands like my daughter. I assumed there'd be an accommodation made. And I waited, and I waited, and I became angry. I became angry that a generation of kids was just being left. Apparently it wasn't, quote, safe for them to come back to school. Well, there was no science behind this. And, you know, as a lawyer, I wanted to run into court. I wanted to sue somebody. I wanted to scream from the top of the mountaintop, it's not fair what you're doing to these kids. And my wife said, you know, chap, you can't solve every problem. You got to be patient. So I was patient. And I told the school board, and I told our superintendent on the schools issue, I'm going to keep my mouth shut until December 31st, 11:59 p.m. And then I'm going to speak. I'm speak because as a father, I'm tired of it. I have listened and read every scientific treatise I could get my hands on. I believe, as a Democrat, but also as a public servant, we ought to be representing science. And there are times where, we talk very tough against people that don't accept science. Accept the science. Well, the science, again, is very clear. Now, you may say to me, yes, but this is a local authority. Well, first of all, local authority doesn't mean much to a 9-year-old, okay? A 9-year-old sitting home saying local authority means nothing. Secondly, we fund these school systems, okay? We wrote a check last year for $7.7 billion, and what do we get? In a lot of school divisions, we got a glorified University of Phoenix, except for University of Phoenix, you probably wouldn't gotten your money back. So let's stop pretending we have no say in what's going on. These kids have constitutional rights. Article 8, Section 1, a constitutional right. Now, where are we right now? This bill, if we pass, I wish it would take effect at midnight tonight. I really do. But it won't. I'm a realist. So I asked Senator Dunnavant, and I apologized to her, but I asked her to take the emergency clause off because you know what? I want everyone to vote for it. I want everyone to vote for it because I know we all love kids. I'm not unique to that. I can speak to my own experience, but my experience pales in comparison to other experiences people have as fathers and mothers. But for God's sake, let's speak for the kids. And I would simply say to those groups, and again, my experience with the public school teachers in Fairfax County Public Schools with all my kids has been so wonderful, and I owe them so much. But if you're standing between a father and his daughter's education, you're not in a safe place. Work with us. Cooperate with us. But let's get these schools open. Let's put deadlines on people. Let's bring some accountability back. I talked with Senator Dunnavant. I don't have the ability or the brains to be in the Medical Reserve Corps. But if people aren't willing to come back and teach in our public school, I'd be willing to start an educator reserve corps. They want to have a class on secure transactions? I'll teach it. You want to have a class on civics? I'll teach it. That to me could not be more important than anything else. We have got to get these kids back into school. We have got to educate them. We have got to give them a chance to be around other children. We cannot keep them locked up at home in front of a computer. It's not right. So, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. I've trespassed on your time. I've spoken on this issue twice, and that I won't speak on it again. But please, send these kids back to school. Give them a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to compliment the patron and also the senator from Fairfax City who have advocated for this and have made this a focus of their session. I can tell you that before I came to session, I know that the single biggest issue for the people that I represent was getting their kids in school. And I just want to speak to one or two brief things quickly. The first is that it's not safe for our kids to be in school. And I just want to echo the sentiments of the senator from Fairfax City and say, it isn't safe for our kids to be out of school at home for a year. It isn't fair for our children to miss a year of their education. For a first grader, the year that you learn to read, to miss a year of their education, you don't get that year back. And for those children who are home unsupervised, it isn't safe to be at home for as many months as these kids have been at home. And so I would just urge the members of the body, all of you whom I know, hear from as many people as I hear from, that this is their single largest priority. And we've made it a priority. And I know that we've immunized thousands of teachers in Fairfax. And I can tell you for sure it isn't fair. 100% isn't fair that the only kids that can be in school right now are the ones whose parents can afford expensive tuition. And that's the case in many, many places. And so I would just say, I want to compliment the senator from Fairfax City, who I thought gave a great floor speech the other day, drawing a rather interesting distinction between a 9-year-old and a 99-year-old. And while it's been a major point of discussion about the fact that sending kids to school is unsafe, I think we know the science from Dr. Dunnavant and the science from everybody else that it's not unsafe.
Mr. President, I'm very fortunate. I have a little girl who's 9 and in 3rd grade, and she's fairly bright and fairly articulate, and she's had a lot of opportunity. But I'm also very fortunate because of the county I live in, Hanover County. They made a decision early on during this process, and we do not have elected school boards. We have appointed school boards, and maybe that's why we so wisely made the decision to have in-person education. In Hanover, Mr. President, that in-person education is every day of the week. It's not 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, it's every day. But families have the opportunity, the choice to decide whether they want to take a virtual option. Well, in Hanover, we had to make that decision back in June. So when we were still going through all the choices, when we had just come out of the time in March where the governor had said all the schools need to shut down, we had to make choices. Well, Reagan is pretty important to me, and y'all probably know the story. She spent a lot of time with me over the last number of years. Some of those out of necessity because we didn't have any choice, but some of it because she just goes everywhere with me. And Mr. President, because of that, our schedules with special session and everything were a little up in the air, and I made the choice. We sat down and looked at it, and Robin has her PhD in child developmental psychology, so she has a little bit of background in this area, and we made the choice to do virtual, but we made the choice to supplement that with a pod. So we found a teacher who was not teaching in the classroom, and she had a group of kids, and Reagan was in a pod. We also supplemented her education with a self-directed educational group called Kumon. She's doing math, she's solving for X in 3rd grade, and so she's way ahead of the curve. And she has not missed a beat during the pandemic. Mr. President, it's interesting because Reagan's little best friend, Morgan, is 13. She's a little older than Reagan, but they're best friends. Morgan's Mensa Bright, literally been invited to join Mensa. And her family made the choice for her to go to school. So she's been in school every day during the pandemic. And Reagan and Morgan spend every time outside of school that they possibly can together. And last night, they both spent the night at the house because we don't have school yesterday and today. And I kissed them both, and they were talking about going to school this week. And listening to the two of them talk and listening to Reagan re-articulate the conversations they have, socialization, it's not just about education. We've been able to supplement Reagan for education. Morgan reads more than any person I know, much less child. They are both extremely bright. But without the ability to be able to socialize with other children, it is extremely challenging. Watching how Morgan deals with the time, there was a point where her class had to quarantine, so she was out of school for a period of time. She spent a lot more time with Reagan during that quarantine because she needed to be around other kids, around other people. So, Mr. President, when you look at this decision, we are mandating this, and we should be mandating this because our children need two things. They need the education. Not every child is as fortunate as Reagan and Morgan. Not all of them have the ability to have that supplement. Not all of them have parents who are willing to spend the extra resources and time. We made the decisions. We made the choices not to do certain things, not to make purchases, to have those. Not every family has that option. Mr. President, but not every child, regardless of their academic ability, needs to have the ability to be around other children. When we look at the factors that determine whether children succeed or not succeed, a number of members in this body were on the Early Childhood Development Committee. They don't just focus on the ability to read. They don't just focus on the ability to do math. It's also how you socialize and developmental and behavior. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, when our children are not able to be in school, they're not able to be around other kids, they don't have that. So, Mr. Chairman, President, I feel very strongly about this. We made the choice for Reagan to be in the pod and do virtual school. That was a mistake. She'll starts back tomorrow morning in person. She's met her teacher. She's super excited about being back in school. But Mr. Chairman, President, if we do not vote to mandate, to require our kids have the opportunity to be in school, we're sentencing them. We're sentencing them to have an additional year without having that socialization, without being in school with their peers. It is unacceptable. Last night I spoke to a group of college students, and they asked, what were the most important issues that you're dealing with? They talked about marijuana, they talked about death penalty, because that's what all the stories are about. This is the most important bill that we will vote on this legislative session. If you think that anything is more important, you're deceiving yourself. The generation of our children, what they will be able to succeed and do, their trajectory going forward is going to be based on whether they can get back into school, have the opportunities to learn in person, and have the opportunities to continue that socialization. Mr. President, I am glad to hear that as we go through this discussion, that senators are looking at the facts, that they are looking at what is going on in their school systems, and they're making the choice. But make no mistake about it. If you do not vote for this bill, there'll be some school systems, like Hanover, that the children will continue to succeed and excel because they'll have that opportunity. But a number of school systems and a number of children around the state will continue to fall further behind, and we have the ability to prevent that. We have the ability to help them, and we have the ability to require that they get that education that they deserve. A vote for this bill helps those children and make sure they do not fall further behind.
Mr. President, members of this body, I don't know why the emergency clause was taken off. I wish it wasn't, but that's another point, another issue. Let me just share with the body some givens. Number one, if these students don't go back to school full-time until the earliest of September of this year, those children will have missed a year and a half of school, 18 months. Now, I don't care how well they do around the kitchen table. If you talk to any academician, any school board member, almost everybody is in agreement that those children are far behind. They have fallen far behind. Number two, the senator from Fairfax said that maybe we should tap the brakes. I listened very carefully to the senator from Henrico County, and she said it very clearly that the science supports the following, that those children in school had less transmission, less infection. That's the science. That's the empirical evidence. To me, that's a full stop and is dispositive as to how we go forward. Then the gentleman from Hanover talked about another component, the socialization, and he referenced his daughter, Reagan, who was very bright and intuitive, obviously takes her mother's traits, but he mentioned the socialization benefits that are lost by staying at home, and that's a given. Now, let me share with you, it's not a school district, but I think it's informative. My children go to All Saints Catholic School. There are 26 schools in the Catholic Diocese in Richmond, going all the way, it's the southern half of Virginia, all the way down to Roanoke, Franklin. All 26 schools are open. Their rate, the amount of COVID cases is de minimis when they're in school. Now, I don't believe that Catholics catch COVID-19 less than Protestants or Episcopalians, Muslims, Jews. I don't believe that. That's some strong evidence about the benefits of being in school. Now, at All Saints, there are 187 students. They've had no COVID-19 cases. They also have a virtual component where 20 students can avail themselves of virtual study. But I think it is a good example of why we should not only not put on the brakes, but we should get these kids back in school as quickly as possible. And the last thing I'm going to say is this. Many folk who are opposed to this bill said words to the effect, we got to put faith and confidence in the school boards. Well, I don't disagree with that, but I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. I'm not sure who is in the ears of the members of the school board. Is it the teachers' unions? Is it the parents? I don't know. But I have spoken privately with many school board members, and they have said, I represent 5 different jurisdictions, and they believe these kids should be back in school. Not necessarily the statement that's coming from a unified school board. So with that said, in conclusion, you look at the science, kids in school, less transmission, less infection, less disease. You've got empirical evidence from all the private and parochial schools that are open and not having COVID-19 cases. I think it's clear, and then when you consider how far these children are falling behind, I think we have to open these schools as soon as possible, and that's why I would also reiterate, I'm disappointed that the emergency clause was taken out. I'd ask the body to support SB 1303.
Yep, Mr. President, in my opinion, this bill is just about choice, and it allows parents and schools the option of letting kids be there in person or virtually. And I know that's possible because I see my own kids switch back and forth between in person and virtually with little to no effort. You know, I get confused, and I'm relatively new here, but trying to figure out which bills we are going to tell localities what to do and which bills we're going to decide for them. It seems like we kind of pick and choose. When are we going to tell localities what to do, and when are we going to leave it up to them? So there's different groups out here, but I think this is absolutely an area where we need to be providing some leadership and some direction for our schools, not just for our schools, but for our kids. I run a small study group just out of my home with my 4 kids, and I've spoken before on the floor about how they've been in person because they go to Catholic schools and are fortunate enough. And I drop them off every morning, and we're always running around, searching through the car looking for a mask. They've got 2 teachers on the sidewalk taking temperatures. I see when they change classes, they go outside the buildings. I'm not allowed to go in the building ever. So they've done all kinds of different things, but they've stayed in school and they've put those measures in place. I know that there was a positive case. I get about 3 emails a week probably that there's either a positive student or a teacher, and I noted but delete the emails and we move on and we continue with school. There was a positive case in my son's class and they had to quarantine for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I still had to go to work. I would wake him up in the morning. I remember leaving for work. He would have video games on and his computer set up on the side. You could see the top half of his head. I'm like, are you going to go to school today? And he was in school, but and I had to go to work. I couldn't stay and watch, and I think a lot of parents are in that same boat. I worry about the mental health most of these kids. I think each and every one of us has gotten emails about the depression, the anxiety. We've all heard about suicides that have been related just to the isolation that we've done to these kids. There was just yesterday I read an article about an Illinois mother suing the governor because of her son's suicide, and these are real problems. I don't open my social media without seeing another post from a frustrated mother friend of mine who's worried about her kids and their mental health. And the senator from Hanover was right about, kids need other kids. We need that social interaction piece. That's what we're missing. My 12-year-old was so upset over the summer because they had been out of school since March. She signed me up for an exchange student, to get an exchange student, and then asked if we could have a foster child. This was, which is kind of entertaining, and it finally got off the list. But those are the measures. These kids really need each other. They need other people. I have a sister who's a teacher in Florida who teaches junior high algebra, and she made the comment to me the other day when we were discussing about our kids in school, and she's like, I can't believe you guys are not in person everywhere, because they've been in person in other states, and I think they're doing it just like our private and Catholic schools are doing it. They're finding a way. At my place where I work at a healthcare, at a clinic, where we I too am exposed to vulnerable people, and I worry about their health. But we invite sick people to come visit us. I go to work every day. We never shut our doors. We continue to invite patients in and family members with precautions in place. We never were causes of any outbreak. We have not lost any staff members. But I think there's a way to do things, and we've all adapted in every other way. We've done things in church and going to the grocery store and being here. We've found ways to adapt and overcome. Our country wasn't based on fear. And I think there's a lot of fear that we're seeing right now. Our country's based on science and ingenuity, and how are we going to get the job done? I know we've seen how other places can do the job and get our kids back in school, and I hope that you support this bill because of all those reasons. Thank you.
I've listened to these arguments from everybody, and I echo a lot of the things that some folks have said, but I have to say I was particularly struck by one thing. And I hope you all heard this from the senator from Fairfax City, because I did. And in part of what he was talking about, he said, we are leaving a generation behind. And that's a pretty big deal in my mind. We are leaving a generation behind. All of those children who don't have the resources to get an education other than a public education, all those resources, children who don't have the help that they need. They've lost a year of school, and they can't get it back. And now they're looking at you losing another year of school. I'm not a teacher, but my mother was a teacher, my sister-in-law, my wife. I've listened to them, and I've heard some of the things that they've talked about. And I don't know how you get that back for those children. Once they've lost it, I don't think you do. And so they start out from behind. And what really strikes me today, I've heard a lot of strained arguments against this bill. And frankly, it should have an emergency clause, but I understand how the numbers work up here. I would be willing to bet that almost universally we all agree that schools need to be reopened. We know that the science demands that. We know it's safe. We know it can be done because we've seen examples of it within the state and in other places. I've heard talk about the governor's guidance. The governor is not an impediment to opening schools. The governor is not the one that is keeping our schools from opening, but I'll tell you who is. It's the teachers' union, and it's criminal. I have talked to these other teachers that aren't in the union. They want to go back to school and they want to teach. The teachers' union is flatly stopping the schools from opening in Virginia, but it's worse than that. They are using a pandemic as a negotiating tool to try to get more of their demands while they aren't even in school. And Mr. President, that to me is absolutely appalling. I have seen this, I've talked to folks, and I just want to remind
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate all the work that's been put into this effort by the Senator from Fairfax City and the Senator from Henrico and so many others, but especially them for their leadership. Appreciate the Senator from Fairfax City sharing his personal story and highlighting the constitutional necessity to doing this. It's only been mentioned twice on the floor today in this lengthy discussion, but we have a constitutional obligation to the school children of the Commonwealth. And if we do not do this, if we do not advance this effort, we are failing to uphold that obligation. And I appreciate the Senator from Henrico's leadership so much, explaining the science. I'm very grateful that we have a a medical doctor in the General Assembly. She's our only medical doctor we have in the entire General Assembly. I think we need to listen to her medical advice when she tells us why she thinks this is a good idea. And I appreciate the senior senator from our capital here in Richmond when she says that the effects of this will last long after this. That is certainly true. And that's why I believe that we need to have this end now. Because I don't believe that it's a linear progression of there will be more effects longer. I believe it is rising exponentially. And it's not just my own gut belief, it's what we hear from the experts about the longer that in-person learning is delayed. And something I want to add, when we talk about how we need to watch out for kids in the future, I fear about our kids that have high needs especially, but the group I fear most for during this are the kids between the 25th and 75th percentile. The majority of our kids who are never going to be in the gifted programs, and they're also not likely going to receive as many supports as some of our children with high needs. And as a group, they are really, really missing out during this as well. It's been suggested that the bill is not as strong because there's not an emergency clause. I agree, I wish there was an emergency clause. It comes off a little less genuine, though, when that comment's made by folks that voted against it when it had an emergency clause. If we had 32 votes, the emergency clause would be on this bill and we'd do it. And it would be great. I've never been in a situation before where the governor puts the emergency clause back on a bill that I wanted. Today, I find myself, if the governor did that, I would love that. I would invite that from the governor. I hope that this bill passes strongly today like I believe it might. And I hope that it's actually taken up in the House Education Committee that refused to meet once during the special session when we were trying to address these issues and help get our schools prepared to reopen. There's been several discussions about we need to help our schools reopen. We tried that several times during the special session, and House Education refused to meet once. They didn't reject our ideas, they refused to consider them. I hope this bill comes out of here on a strong bipartisan vote, and I hope it's taken up in the House. I hope it's passed, and I hope the governor puts an emergency clause back on it, and then we can do that. That would be outstanding. We have a constitutional obligation. The senator from Fairfax City was exactly right. We must fulfill that obligation, and the senator from Henrico is exactly right to give us such good medical advice. I appreciate her doing that, and I hope we will advance the bill today.
think pretty soon everybody's going to have spoken to this, but it's an important bill, and I'm glad we're devoting significant time to it instead of a bill that passed unanimously about 4 hours ago. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, what I would say is a couple of things. First of all, I view this vote as being more symbolic than about substance. This bill is clearly a work in progress. This bill is not going to pass in the form it's in right now. It's sending a message, and it's going to get edited if it doesn't meet up with the veto pen eventually. But it clearly sends a message, and I think it's an important message. And I'm hoping that people on the other end of it, in lots of different places, take a message from it. The second thing I'll say is that not all school boards are created equal, and I represent a part of 3 counties that often feel like they're forgotten about by the larger jurisdictions within which they exist. The Route 1 corridor in Fairfax County is a small part of a county that's larger than 8 states, and it probably has 50 to 60% of the per capita family income as the rest of the county does. Most of my elementary schools that I represent are Title I schools. My district, 1 in 4 people I represent was born in another country. They have no idea how to speak to me or how to reach out to me. They don't even know I exist. They don't even know what I do. But I do know they're counting on me to fight for them. And I guarantee you that a lot of those families have their kids at home right now going to school, being supervised by their 10 or 12-year-old brother, or by their grandmother that doesn't speak English, or maybe not being supervised by anybody at all. I have other people who live in my district that are very much like me, and they're dropping money on all kinds of childcare they've never had to spend on before because they can't have 2 working parents without having somebody else to supervise the child to do this online virtual school thing. This process is getting old, and it's getting old really fast for everybody, and I fully recognize that. And I just want to share with you all, I do a constituent survey every year, and I don't pretend this survey to be in any way remotely scientific because it's typically responded to by people who like me a lot. Typically people like me a lot, or people that really don't like me and want to tell me that. But my district. I mean, my district. I think Tim Kaine got something like 70% in the district that I represent. My district has a certain lean to it, and I feel like this issue, at least a month or 2 or 3 ago, was pretty heavily politicized. I think in the last month or so, it's become much less politicized, right? And so the survey, result, I got back 278 people responded to me. I asked the question, I had a bunch of different choices about when do you think schools should open. 21% said open the schools right now. I think I know who they are. 14% said parents should have the option to go right now. 15% said everybody should go back as soon as every school personnel has been vaccinated, and then 26.5% said every parent should have the option to send their child back once everybody's vaccinated. So in other words, 76% of the people who respond to my survey, mostly people who like me a lot, say that their kids should go back once all the personnel are vaccinated, which I'm told will probably be towards March 1st, right? And I can tell you that if our school boards don't get people the option to send their kids back in person after everybody's been vaccinated, there's going to be torches and pitchforks out there saying, open the damn door. And from my perspective, one of the biggest problems is that our school boards have not communicated with a whole lot of clarity as to when people are going to be able to see light at the end of the tunnel. And that's driving a ton of the anxiety. And these school boards need to start communicating clearly. And so I'm going to vote for this imperfect bill, but I'm doing it to send a message to our school boards to start helping to resolve this anxiety, because it shouldn't land in our lap. We entrust them to do it, and they're not communicating effectively. So, Mr. President, I hope this conversation continues. It's clearly going to be a longer one, but I think the public has I think, gelled around what we need to do, and it's pretty clear, and I think this hopefully will give them the nudge they need.
Do any senators other than the patron wish to be heard on Senate Bill 1303? Seeing none, Senator from Henrico, Senator Dunnavant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to respond to a few things we've heard on the floor today and wrap this up.
Senators, the floor.
Number one, I would say if you're concerned about the UK or the South African viral strain, don't be concerned about the acuity. Number one, all those strains have been shown to be covered by the vaccine. Number two, they're more contagious, but not more deadly or more serious, cause more serious illness. Second thing is quarantining. We heard from the senator from Bath, what on earth would we do? Well, that's why we have protocols. Indeed, if there are people that have to quarantine, that's why you have both in-person and virtual, so you can pivot, but there should be a precedent that in-person is available. Community spread. Let me reiterate the science we talked about earlier. Community spread is not an appropriate way to measure schools because the population for children is so much less at risk for this virus, and indeed, so are the adults around them. Back to my friend from Southern Chesapeake, I believe. The teachers are not at more risk. In fact, they found that teachers, unvaccinated teachers in schools, had no more risk than their age-relevant compatriots that were not in schools. There is no more risk. The kids are not a vector. That is not accurate. Every study we've shown has seen they are not a vector like they are with the flu. So there are some science answers I wanted to kind of touch on. The next thing is divisions are already adapting. Ask your parents, ask the parents in your district about that if you think that's happening. Because I think, as we've heard from the senator, I have such a hard time with these, but let's see. Senator from Eastern Fairfax County, that there's gel around this. And furthermore, I would say, yes, July 1 is suboptimal. I would prefer it to be immediately because I believe the science dictates that the harm to children for any delay we have in getting back to school vastly exceeds the risk of being in school. But I'll accept July 1 because I think it does give time to prepare, and they can continue to do their adaptations until then, but July 1 we need to be in school. Let's talk about the resources to make this all work. Our schools, from the CARES Act, have received over $940 million in the past year. The governor has given them $500 million to hold them harmless for the loss of enrollment. And let me just clarify that. So these parents who have pulled their children out of public school to educate them in private school and are paying tuition are also going to pay the taxes for the slot their child is not filling in school because of the hold harmless money. The schools have the money to get back safely and follow the protocols. We've heard that this is a desire and people are worn out and they're frustrated. I'm going to use another word. This is disparity. 3 Virginias are evolving in front of our eyes for our children. We have people who can afford to pay for private education. We have parents who can afford to advocate for their children at school boards. And then we have the families that are on the cusp of everything. And we know that they are suffering more than anybody else. This is not a choice. This is not an inconvenience. This is not a desire. This is a responsibility. It's a moral obligation that we protect those children because school is their safe place. And it's about learning, but it's about everything else too. Virtual and in-person being in this bill, that's something that may be nuanced as we go forward, but I wanted people to know if they felt uncomfortable with in-person, they would still have virtual. And quite frankly, I believe the state is prepared and needs to have virtual available as we go forward. Virtually every state that has succeeded in opening schools has done so with centralized leadership, either from the governor or the legislature. That is what we need to do, because we need to give clear direction for the school boards to know how to turn their attention from the argument of do we open to how do we open. And it is our responsibility to give that guidance. A couple of other things to go over. I just want to say, we say this a lot, but the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of good. If our schools are going to be perfect before we open them, they'll never open again. The bill is vague. I would say it's clear. Open the schools. In-person education. This is not Democrat. It's not Republican. This is us really advocating as parents that we all are, grandparents, for the children in Virginia. And let me just read maybe one of the most poignant quotes I've gotten from one of my constituents. And this is a family with 2 incomes. This is a family that has the means to advocate and to pursue other options. And she says, "It's very sad to me that it's now a privilege obtained through one's family having the means to pay for private school for children to have the choice to go to school." This is a really important statement. This is really important leadership. I'm going to suggest, if you want to talk about science, there is a mountain of science that we need in person education, and there's not even an anthill of science to oppose that. So I hope that we get a unanimous vote. I don't think we're going to, but I hope that we move this forward to the House, and I do hope the House discusses it, because this is the most important thing we need to do this year in this session. Thank you, Mr. President.